Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from Pro Football Network. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, have you gone and done any atrocities, encountered any atrocities, been a part of any atrocities while wearing the Luke Braun mask this week?
So first of all, I'm not aware of any such mask, or even who this Luke Braun person is, but were I to have encountered any atrocities in my travels, certainly I would report all of the evidence I have of any wrongdoing to the appropriate authorities as quickly as possible. And I would suggest that anybody do the same thing, especially if they see somebody with blonde hair and blue eyes and looks like they might be from Los Angeles for some reason.
And holding bunnies, too. That's definitely something this time of year you need to worry about.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
It's like looking in the candy, folks. It's something you have to do. You have to check to make sure that nobody has any locked on podcasts in there. You don't want that going to your kids.
Absolutely not. That stuff will poison you, man. And it's a sick world out there that you feel like you have to do that. What used to be an innocent kids activity that nobody ever was worried about this sort of thing in the 2010s or the 2000s or the 1990s or the 1980s. This totally new thing of putting stuff in kids' candy bars that are definitely true. You definitely need to check for any locked on podcasts in there because that'll ruin your kids.
Yeah, it's science, folks. This is the new normal. We just have to accept it. And with that, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well. We have a Cardinals game to preview. We're going to bring on Blake Murphy from Revenge of the Birds podcast. He'll be on here in just a minute with Arif to discuss what's going on with the Cardinals and previewing the game for Sunday. But before we do that, just want to welcome you guys to Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well. If you enjoy the show and would like to donate to the show, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go to patreon.com/Norse Code and donate there for $3.50 a month. Or you can go with the year subscription. You get access to stuff like the bonus material. You get access to stuff like the Patreon, all of that. So you can go over to patreon.com/Norse Code. You can also go over to paypal.me/Norse Code as well for a one-time donation. Or you can go over to norsecode.threadless.com and go and buy a t-shirt, buy a baby onesie. The list is far longer than it should be of items that are available that have Arif's face on it. But you can check that out over at norsecode.threadless.com. Also, a quick announcement. November 17th, we will be doing a live show in Minneapolis. It'll actually be over at Eagan, a place we've done it before over at Union 32. It's an absolutely fantastic place. We had a great time there last time. Looking forward to doing it again. And looking forward to meeting some of the fans again. So check it out, the Union 32 Craft House in Eagan, Minnesota. That's 2864 on Highway 55, Eagan, Minnesota. It's great. This will be on a Thursday. It's the Thursday before the Monday night game against the Cowboys, and we will be giving away a ticket to that game. So if you're interested in the ticket, if you're interested in going to the game, if you're interested in Norse Code, check us out over at the Union 32 Craft House. We're looking forward to it, and I will be displaying. I will have it on display during the show, the Laquan Treadwell jersey. So you can actually get your picture taken with this greatness before it finds its forever home far away from me. I cannot tell you.
Get your picture taken with the jersey.
Get your picture taken with the jersey. Get your picture taken with the picture of Roger Goodell that has been haunting me for 4 months now. This is your opportunity. I suggest you take it. Over at the Union 32 Craft House, over in Eagan, Minnesota. Great food, great drinks. Check it out. They have a big wall of drinks. It's for self-pour. It is great. So, check it out. November 17th. We'll be doing that likely about 7:30 or so during the football game. It'll be on. We will likely ignore it. I don't even know what game is playing that particular day for Thursday Night Football. But because it's Thursday Night Football, it can't be great.
Well, let's find out real quick. We've got the Thursday Night Football schedule online. That is the great thing about the internet these days. You can find anything on it.
Even the Thursday night football schedule.
The Thursday night football schedule. You said it was on the 17th?
The 17th.
Yeah, there's no... Oh, no, sorry, I was looking at the wrong. It's Titans-Packers. Wow.
So come out, we can watch the Packers lose, and you can listen to Arif talk about why the Packers are losing, likely involving witchcraft, over at Union 32 Craft House. So, there. I'm going with that pitch this time instead of get into an argument in person with Arif. I feel like
Yeah, sure.
I feel like that one's a little overplayed, but you still can if you're feeling froggy. So again, check that out. That'll be great. Also, if you're looking for a mask this year and need something that is truly going to frighten the kids and is an abomination against our Lord, check out the Luke masks that we put together. That'll be in the show notes. Credit goes to both Kyle Slaby and myself for putting this together. The original one is just atrociously bad. And mine isn't much better, but it is in fact a Luke mask that you can wear for any occasion, really, whether it's committing an atrocity, whether it's robbing a bank, or whether it's just going door to door and terrifying your neighbors. So check it out. It's just an Imgur link, but it is printed out quite the fantastic mask. So let's skipping all that, we've finished all that. Let's get down to the actual show itself, and let's go to a Cardinals preview that Arif taped earlier today with Blake Murphy from the Revenge of the Birds podcast.
All right, I'm here with our perpetual Cardinals guest, Blake Murphy. If you've heard our podcast with the Cardinals before those games, you've heard Blake Murphy. He is on the Revenge of the Birds podcast. How you doing, man?
Hey, it's doing good. Good to be here, Reef. I've got a little bit of a sore throat, but otherwise always glad to talk football, especially when you've got a pretty anticipated matchup, I should say, at least with these teams coming off of a bye week for the Vikings and the mini bye for the Cardinals, actually, looking like a competent NFL team for maybe the first time all season.
Yeah, it should be good. I think that we're probably going to find that the Cardinals team that we saw at the beginning of the season is one that looks very unfamiliar to the one that we saw that we're about to see heading into Sunday. Not only because of the fact that the Cardinals are remarkably injured, that injury report is longer than Kyler Murray is tall, but also they returned DeAndre Hopkins from injury. They traded for Robbie Anderson. It is just a kind of a different look of the team, especially on offense. How have they kind of adapted? We'll go into the position by position stuff, but how have they kind of adapted to all of these? I don't know if you'd call them setbacks because some of them are just like trades, but like these changes in the way that the team functions.
Yeah, it's been a lot. I think the story of the season thus far has been how Arizona has really had these slow starts, and for one reason or another, the scripted plays that they have done have not been very effective. Now, whether it was due to just being blown up by defenses, whether it was simply just having a setback or two, Arizona would come out looking to be able to try to find different ways to take advantage of teams, and wouldn't find it, would probably revert back to, Kyler Murray having to kind of get stuff done with his legs, a little bit more of the kind of air raid staples that you would see as far as being able to run, more comeback routes, at least being able to have maybe another shot play or two that so far is not really connected. Their deep game has been kind of tough to begin the year, but they've always at least been able to kind of have a chance in the fourth quarter with whatever game they've played so far this season. They really started the year with multitude of issues from, having JJ Watt having a heart issue and coming back into and playing the same game to being injured in camp, having Zach Ertz banged up, having a guard that they had, I think, in Justin Pugh banged up repeatedly throughout the season until he finally got a season-ending injury, and having the Hopkins suspension. It's really just been something that they have not been able to kind of overcome unless they were playing a team like the Carolina Panthers, or at the end of the Raiders game, it still was a miraculous finish where you got to see them essentially get out of most of these situations through the defense and Vance Joseph helping put the offense into advantageous situations, and Arizona being able to go on some decent extended drives, being able to put up points at the end of the game. And that's really been kind of the story of their season up until, like we said, with DeAndre Hopkins back, suddenly it seemed like that offense that hadn't clicked all season long seemed like it clicked in both the running game, the passing game, got multiple guys involved. And I think taking AJ Green off of the field, I think was actually a plus for Arizona as well. That's one of the things I think that, unlike last year where he actually, I believe, led the team, and he actually led Hopkins in receiving, I should say, due to the injury. Kirk led the team in receiving. Him being off the field has actually, I think, been a benefit to the Cardinals since they've had a very, very difficult time getting any sort of a deep passing game going, much less to a 34-year-old receiver whose contract is fully guaranteed for this season. Do as you do, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about the position groups one by one. We start off by talking about that receiver group. You already mentioned kind of DeAndre Hopkins. I am a little bit curious about kind of the role that you expect Robbie Anderson to play, given kind of the varied roles that he's had in Carolina, the fact that there is some level of every role kind of, I'm not going to say taken care of, but accounted for with the receiver group. It just isn't as much kind of talent maybe as they want, although like you mentioned, Greg Dortch has been a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, it feels like with their offense, this is part of going back to college with Cliff Kingsbury. There's a lot of times you'll see, the receivers and his offenses and the quarterbacks kind of having to be on the same page, whether it's either both reading the coverage at the same time and adjusting their routes or having, some option routes that they'll run. And that's kind of been why it's been segmented into these kind of outside receiver roles and then inside receiver roles, where you're able to, essentially have your slot guys are able to go and focus on getting separation, getting open. Or like last year, we saw Christian Kirk being able to be a true deep threat from the slot. And then the outside, they'll be able to take, some comeback routes, take some 50-50 balls. Kyler, this is obviously, of course, due to his height. There's a lot that he and Russell Wilson have in common where they can favor throwing to the outside. They're very good deep ball throwers. They're very good at being able to see going to the boundary. And what's interesting is that when you look at Robbie Anderson, that kind of seems to fit like a 50-50 deep ball guy. He's got the height at 6'3", and he's got another week in the offense. They did take a shot to him last week against the Saints. He wasn't able to really disentangle from the corner that they had. They probably will take at least another shot or two I could see this week, but the biggest change we've seen with Arizona has been they've moved DeAndre Hopkins around a lot. He's lined up on the left, on the right, and on both sides of the slot this year. They've been using that, I think, in a lot of ways to help dictate coverage for Kyler Murray. And usually if Hopkins has moved into the slot, like he's been getting the ball is what it seemed like through at least the Saints game from what we've seen. I think that Arizona has been missing at least having a secondary weapon to go along with Hopkins the last few years. Christian Kirk, I think, did a fine role in that as far as a slot receiver, but they've really needed an outside threat to kind of pair with him. And they've kind of got that for maybe 5-6 games last year with AJ Green, before he just kind of took a step back for the most part, being a 34-year-old receiver. I think that the Cardinals, at least for the most part, are probably going to be looking at not their complete offense. Obviously, you'd have wanted, and I would have loved to have seen what Hollywood Brown could have done with DeAndre Hopkins for a lot longer. He's supposed to still come back this season. I think he's out for about a month is what they said the early reports had indicated. And that's a bummer because he had been on pace for at least like 1,400 yards, about 10 touchdowns. He had essentially been their number one receiver. So he'd, of course, been lining up only on that left side of the offense, kind of in that D-Hop X role. When we've seen now is that Cliff Kingsbury's kind of adjusted the offense a bit, and it now looks almost like a more modern NFL offense comparatively to what it was back in early 2020 with this kind of air raid, go balls all the time, and then hand it off to what's the phrase you're looking for? A light box, because you're trying to spread guys out with the air raid. So It's like Cardinals are running the ball super well. Well, of course they are. They've got a light box. You got a big back and James Conner back there, and everyone's watching for Kyler Murray to pick it up a first down with his legs. I'm going to be very interested to see how that offense continues to evolve the rest of the season.
Well, let's talk about kind of the pivot point of that offense, the quarterback. Kyler Murray, I think that there has been a lot of change in the way that he's been perceived over the course of the past couple of seasons, whether he is just knocking on the door to being a potentially elite quarterback or, somebody that is struggling a lot. He's somebody that some people, in some years and some weeks might put him as the 20th quarterback, and in other years, other weeks might put him as the 5th quarterback. It's somebody he's kind of vacillated a lot, but his play style fundamentally hasn't changed. Has that tendency to kind of target the sidelines and avoid the middle of the field and kind of ignore some of the open grass available to you, something that you typically want to do in an air raid offense. Has that kind of limited what he can do as a passer, and kind of where do you see him as a quarterback overall?
Yeah, I think as far as when you look at the consistency that he does show, is that he has progressed a lot from where you can see where he started out from. Where he started out from, you could see is kind of your typical one read and run type of quarterback. A lot of offenses in the NFL are kind of getting through one read. He's at least made progressive steps each season in terms of, doing a better job of passing over the middle, being able to actually not throw, some of the interceptions that in the past he just wouldn't see the underneath coverage or would just assume that he had the arm strength to get it in there. We also would see times that he would bail the pocket and try to make a plays with his legs. It seems like that a lot of it has been kind of a combination of both him kind of being victimized by the team at times, and then other times you'll see him kind of, putting himself into harm's way. There's a time where you can see that he'll get some pressure at someone up the middle. He'll run and make a scramble on the play and then take a 1 yard loss versus tossing the ball away. Sometimes you can at least see, but then you also can at least notice there's times where he at least progresses and is able to essentially make the correct call, make the right reads. I know a lot of teams have now been focusing a lot more on these cover two type of places, and we've seen Cliff Kingsbury and his scheme a lot of times try to protect his quarterback from taking too many hits. I think that's been one of the biggest areas of that's a pro and a con maybe for a guy like Kyler Murray, is that he's a guy who's going to be able to make plays with his legs, but he doesn't, like taking unnecessary hits. And at times, there's times where he can just, slide down instead of, taking a big hit in the pocket. Other times he's able to craftily get away. A lot of what we've seen, though, has been that his legs are kind of the best weapon that he has. And I do wonder how much of the limitations that you can see are something that, is going to come down to coaching. A lot of people have questioned Cliff Kingsbury. It seems like he came to Arizona and they had already put like the seat on the stove just kind of before he got there, just because of how crazy it was for Arizona to, keep the general manager, hire a brand new coach. They brought in this air raid type of approach. I think a lot of people are torn on how much of it is Kyler Murray's limitations of being a shorter quarterback who, is maybe not taking his game to the next level versus seeing small little adaptations and people wondering maybe it's a fresh face could come in and figure out a couple problems, or it's kind of like, it's like I think someone had talked about it, I think saying that it's almost like that one toxic person, like, oh, I can fix them. It's like, there's that type of talent that you see with Kyler Murray. It's like, oh, I can fix these flaws or something like that. I don't know how much of that you can, but I do know that a lot of the flaws, at least for where he is right now, you can at least learn to live with them. The Cardinals have seen a truly, solid offensive approach while they've had him. And it's hard to be able to say, because in this team's history, they haven't really ever had a true dual threat quarterback. It's always been these old, banged up guys at the end of their careers that kind of get one last little magic run before they retire and send Arizona back to back to quarterback purgatory all over again. So I think that he's in a spot where I would put him outside of like the top 10 quarterbacks. Maybe it would be not quite outside. Like, I think people have slotted him in that 8 to 12 range. I could see that being the case where he may have a lower floor than, some of those other quarterbacks, but just from the talent that he has alone, he's got a higher ceiling, at least, of being able to have some of those massive games. We just haven't seen many of those games, at least, without DeAndre Hopkins also in tow. And that's something that's going to be very interesting for Sunday's game.
Awesome. Well, one element that you mentioned of the way that the air raid operates is that they'll spread the field out and then they'll run the ball to a light box. You mentioned that James Conner is kind of a big back. I don't know if he'll be available for this game. We saw some good stuff from Eno Benjamin, but I think a lot of people are really interested in what Keontae Ingram, 6th-round rookie, has been able to put together a really exciting set of explosive plays from him recently. How does that running back room shake out, and how do you think it kind of matches up against the Vikings run defense that has improved, but is certainly not any reasonable stretch of the imagination the league's best?
Yeah, it's been fun. The Cardinals kept 5 running backs coming out of training camp this year. And for those of us who got to go and visit camp and see each of them be able to perform, it just made sense because they kept the guys who were most talented, and they didn't want to let a guy like Keontae Ingram, who is about he's like your 6 foot 225 type of player, the big back who's actually got the ability to make some great cuts, has solid hands. They didn't want to let another team potentially swipe him off of their practice squad. They did want to keep Darrell Williams as kind of the other big back to be able to take over for James Conner, knowing that Conner is a guy that is going to be able to lower the shoulder. Like you can see last year, Arizona was one of the best teams on fourth down or on the goal line because they had James Conner back there able to punch it in. But delivering that much punishment, especially when you start to get to, older running back years, and I say older of he's like 27 years old or something like that. But in terms of the league, that's ancient. What we've seen instead, I think, has been Eno Benjamin really has blossomed into a guy who can be one of those 3-down running backs as far as being able to utilize whether it's spin moves or balance contact. He's had probably his best season so far in the NFL. He carved out a number 2 running back role, kind of that third down back spot coming out of camp. And Keaontay Ingram, I tell people I felt like it's be more excited to see him in 2023 versus 2022 because you can tell he's still a rookie. He's still having to kind of get some of the little things in pass protection or, some of the different plays. You can even see him kind of running to hit the hole, a little bit of that, I guess you could say almost too excited, where instead of just kind of being patient and letting those blocks develop, he'll sometimes just kind of want to get there and then we'll take maybe a little bit of a loss or kind of get there a little quicker. Eno, on the other hand, has been doing a great job of taking advantage of some of those holes, of being able to be patient, and has had a lot of burst. I think the biggest thing, though, is that because of his smaller size, a lot of that has been more of, there's some plays that you'll see them hand off the ball and you can kind of tell it was a play that you'd have loved to have seen, like, a big back or someone who could break a tackle, get some space. Because the offensive line for Arizona really has been the story of the season. They've been pretty adequate overall in pass protection. A lot of that, I think, is due to Kyler Murray's legs, but they haven't really been able to have a proper run game for the most part because they've been missing, their top 2 starting running backs, and running back 3, Jonathan Ward, went out for the season. He's a guy that they really had trusted a lot on special teams and in goal line situations. So you're talking about, essentially being down to the dregs of the team, but hey, they kept 5 running backs, I guess, just for this reason. And I'm excited to see what Keaontay can do. He was one of my favorite picks, I think, in the draft because he fell all the way to round 6. It wasn't quite as thrilling as a former Arizona State fan when I saw the Cardinals take Eno Benjamin in the 7th round because it was like I instantly knew. I'm like, you needed a running back 3. You're going to say goodbye to Chase Edmonds soon. He's going to be able to fill that Chase Edmonds type of role. And so far, he's done that admirably this season.
That's awesome. That's good to hear. So I do want to talk about that offensive line, but before we do that, let's get to that last skill position. So you've got Zach Ertz on an enormous contract, getting not as many yards as that contract would potentially imply. You've got a rookie, Trey McBride, and something named Steven Anderson. Let me know what that tight end group shakes out to be, and are we even going to see more than one tight end on the field?
Gosh, yeah, the Cardinals have had a interesting time. They signed Ertz to a long-term type of deal. He's actually been one of the most targeted tight ends in the National Football League. He's averaging, I think, about like 6.5 targets a game. The only times that he hasn't were the Chiefs game to begin the season, in which going into that game, I even think I told the people I was going with, I said, Arizona's got so many guys hurt. This is almost like you're waving the white flag. Like they know they don't have a shot. The Saints game, he only had 2 catches. I think a lot of that game plan was specifically designed for DeAndre Hopkins and to not feature him as much, which makes sense when you've got 2 rookie corners on the other side after I believe it was Bradley Roby goes out due to injury. The thing that's been interesting this year has been that the Cardinals have really struggled in terms of their 2 tight end sets because Trey McBride, the rookie, who was kind of a surprise pick for some, he has struggled quite a bit in the blocking this year. He's had a couple of either blown blocks, some other penalties. He's not really gotten involved in the passing game. I think they've also wanted to feature Ertz a little bit more in that regard. With the contract given out, it's kind of hard to blame them. They are at least wanting to see him produce. But with Max Williams having an injury for last year, he's been on the practice squad. They really have struggled a lot with that tight end 2 position. I think that a lot of people were expecting that they would run a lot more of these kind of 12 personnel types, and they really haven't been able to do that as much, in part due to when they've tried to run it out of those places and positions, they've had a lot of problems, at least with McBride, and it's kind of almost been forced onto them as far as they're wanting to see him play and wanting to see him be able to produce, and he's kind of been the most talented guy there. Steven Anderson is kind of just a guy. I don't think that he's going to get a whole lot of snaps for the most part, and with Max Williams hurt, it's like they just haven't really been able to do much more outside of letting him play. So I think that what the change that if you're looking for at the tight end group that would be interesting would be a little bit more Zach Ertz involvement this week, especially because when we're talking about going up against this Vikings team. It's a combination of good safeties, I think, on both sides, but I do think that there is maybe going to be a more attention potentially given to DeAndre Hopkins. That could open up Zach Ertz for a little bit more room over the middle.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Let's talk about that offensive line. I feel like I need to tread carefully here just in case I talk about somebody who actually is secretly injured and I don't know about it. So why don't you tell me who you expect the 5 starting offensive linemen this week to be, and then tell me about them.
Yeah, so I've got the 5 starting offensive linemen this week as DJ Humphries, I think, will play on the left side. I think Kelvin Beachum will play also on the right side. If there is any injuries, Josh Jones has actually been a pretty good backup. I think that he'll be a starter next year. So it's almost all right, they at least can go one deep at the offensive tackle position. It's been the interior of the offensive line that's had issues where they've gone from Rodney Hudson, who's still out injured, to Sean Harlow, to Max Garcia. Both Harlow has essentially been benched now for Billy Price. So you're talking about your 4th string off the street offensive lineman. And they had traded for Cody Ford earlier this season. He's going to be at the left guard spot. The team has actually looked probably their best running the football when Ford came in. Justin Pugh had been battling a bad elbow all year, but had been solid in pass protection. When they had to put Max Garcia at that left guard spot, he just is unfortunately not really having that core strength to be able to keep up to opposing pass rushers. He would just get picked on. I think there's still highlight videos Rams fans have of him getting ragdolled by Aaron Donald in the Rams game. And then Will Hernandez, this is the guy who came out of UTEP, was highly touted as a prospect, went in the 2nd round to the Giants. He's back with his former UTEP offensive line coach, Sean Kugler. He's been a pleasant surprise this season, despite a guy being on a 1-year deal. He's shown a tenacity in the run game, but he's been, I think, consistently inconsistent is how I describe it, where you can at least see that there's times that he's done excellent in his pass protection. Other times you'll see him be able to get beat or be able to get baited into a different type of pass rush move. But usually that's also that's par for the course when you're playing NFC West teams and Aaron Donald already on this season. I think those will be the 5 guys. And it's honestly, until Hudson's able to come back, assuming, I think the joke I think some Cardinals fan had was, Rodney Hudson, they traded for him. He's played, I think, in 8 games of the last 2 years. So I think he's the latest among millennials of quiet quitting was kind of the joke. The Cardinals So we'll see at least. He could have to get kind of talked out of retirement. Cardinals didn't have a backup plan at center, so everyone was pleased to see him return, and he hasn't really gotten on the field at all this season. If he does come back, I think that'll be a plus, but it wasn't too bad last week with Price and with Ford, and they're both going to be at least, I think, getting stronger and more adjusted to the offense moving forward.
When you take a look at that Vikings defensive line, Za'Darius Smith, Dalvin Tomlinson, Harrison Phillips, Danielle Hunter, and I don't know, occasionally Jonathan Bullard, because technically they're a 5-man unit. But
Cardinals legend Jonathan Bullard, yeah, gotta love that. One season he played for us.
Seems to be playing better for the Vikings on his whatever 8 snaps it is than for any other team he's played for. So good for him, man. When you take a look at that Vikings defensive line, and knowing kind of the issues the Cardinals have along their offensive line, what's your reaction? I mean, the Vikings have not earned a high pressure rate, but these are players that people expect to perform.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down, and I think we talked about it previously on the other podcast, how Za'Darius Smith has been the guy who hasn't done as well against the run, while you've seen Danielle Hunter at least kind of not get the sack numbers. I think that there's going to be able to get pressure involved. It wouldn't shock me if you're able to bring Kyler Murray down 2 or so times. Being aware of some of that is where I think we could see some of how Cliff Kingsbury has, when he sees that the offensive line has given up pressure, he kind of will see those yards per attempt just kind of decline because they don't really have the same type of play action game as everyone else. It's part of where they've tried to get those bubble screens or have screen passes involved to some of the guys like a Rondale Moore, or being able to get the ball outside to a DeAndre Hopkins, break a tackle, get a couple yards. That's really been kind of what they've had for the most part. What's really had to kind of change with the Cardinals has been their run game has kind of been the best way of keeping Kyler Murray upright. I think that when you're talking about the matchups, they've done a very good job overall on the tackle spot, which I think does favor Arizona. DJ Humphries has been probably their best offensive lineman. He's been a little banged up, but he's just been, ever since he had a couple of injury-riddled years to start his career, he's been pretty stalwart. Kelvin Beachum has actually been one of the guys who I'd be a little bit maybe more concerned about. He's gotten beaten a time or two. There's part of why I think he's not necessarily the blindside protector. I don't think it's one of those places where it's just going to be Arizona getting blown up, though, because that's one of the things that we've seen in the past is when teams have gotten very comfortable of getting upfield, suddenly you'll see Kyler Murray keep it and run on a quarterback power, and there's nobody in the middle of his way. So he just takes off for the most part. And I think that's going to be where Kyler Murray's legs and how much the Vikings can hit him. If they can get pressure on him, get up in his face, make it where he's not able to see some of those receivers. He's done a much better job of avoiding balls getting batted down at the line, but a lot of times it's having to essentially adjust or get off of his current play or try to run and scramble. Really, I think if the Vikings are going to want to try to be able to get an advantage here, I would even say it'd be not necessarily even sacking Kyler Murray, but more getting pressure, keeping those rushing lanes closed, and making sure he can't leave the pocket. I think that's the area where I could see the Vikings, if they can be able to, contain the edge and make sure he doesn't get around, that could be one spot where I'd look to exploit if I'm Minnesota on the defensive side, because otherwise Arizona, one thing for another, you can say about Cliff Kingsbury and what he's done in the NFL. He's done a good job of making sure that his quarterbacks at least don't take that many sacks or don't take that many hits. And to his credit, after I think he started on pace for what was like an Andrew Luck worthy level of sacks, Kyler Murray himself adjusted, started taking a lot less hits and sacks for keeping up his end of the bargain. So it'll be interesting to see how that matchup wears out, because I don't think Arizona's offensive line is getting a lot better. And if they let up a lot of pressure, it could be a long season this year for the Cardinals.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, let's flip over to the other side of the ball. So when you and I were talking on your podcast, Revenge of the Bros podcast, one name that did not come up, I was a little bit surprised by because he struck me as a fan favorite, and he was on the injury report, Dennis Gardeck, who I have called their best pass rusher because it's been fun to say that. It sounds like he won't be in the game as far as I can tell, and he's been kind of a pleasure to watch. Outside of that, the pass rush options seem to be coming up the interior with J.J. Watt playing both kind of the 3-4 defensive end role as well as the defensive tackle role. Zach Allen generating some pressure up the middle. We talked a little bit about that. Not getting as much out of the other outside linebackers available to them, but making up for it with blitzes, whether that is Budda Baker or Zaven Collins or Isaiah Simmons, whatever that guy's up to these days, whatever part of the field he's parked in. But how exactly do the Cardinals solve this pressure problem without someone like Dennis Gardeck or without a ton of edge rush pressure available to them?
Yeah, and we'll see how it develops they drafted 2 rookies this year, Myjai Sanders and Cam Thomas. Cam Thomas is kind of like, it was funny where we said that he's kind of Zach Allen light if Zach Allen was kind of J.J. Watt light. He's a guy that is more of still kind of a power to speed rusher, kind of fits your 4-3. I think he eventually moves to a defensive end role. And then Myjai Sanders is more of that Hassan Reddick light, gets around the edge, speed rusher type of role. But really what it's come down to has been Vance Joseph trying to be able to find different ways of disguising, whether it's his coverages that he's disguising or his blitzes. He's gotten really good man coverage play when the Cardinals have been in man. The issue has been when they've dropped back into their cover 2. They've just not done as well. I think a lot of that was just the inconsistency of a rookie and a young player in Marco Wilson, just was not quite there in the terms of being able to get all of the mastery of, playing corner at the NFL level. And then you're talking about cornerback 3 at step down. That's where the Cardinals defense really started to slip as far as their pass defense last year. They had Antonio Hamilton, their cornerback 2 out of camp. He's one of those guys that, like you say, you talk about a Dennis Gardeck, a guy who has long barbarian type of hair, like Conan the Barbarian, plays special teams for years. And then it's just kind of like, I think it was funny at one point, I think he had like a sack and an interception in the same game. And it was like he had outperformed Chandler Jones's Raiders stat line for the season in like a single game. I think against, was it Philly or someone like that? It was just kind of been crazy, at least to see how, some of these cool stories in the league will just have players that will stick. I think the way that Vance Joseph has kind of gone around that is you're able to see them get some good matchups up front with Zach Allen or J.J. Watt. Those guys have done exceptional at being able to, beating guys one-on-one if they're matched up with the guard on the interior side. You've been able to see them both get pressure up the middle. It hasn't always led to sacks, though, and that's been part of with Arizona. They had 6 sacks of Geno Smith in the Seahawks game, still ultimately lose the game just because their offense couldn't get going. I think that the biggest thing to look for is going to be man across the board, cover 0, which is kind of the Vance Joseph staple. He'll line everyone up in the center of the field, including Zaven Collins and Isaiah Simmons in the A-gaps. And then when he fires the blitz, you don't know where that blitzer's coming from. Sometimes it'll be everyone bails into coverage and they're only rushing 3 guys. Other times he'll bring the entire house. There's been sometimes he's brought a corner blitz with Byron Murphy or Budda Baker, like you said, blitzing off the edge to great success. Usually those will pop up in the second half when the Cardinals absolutely need it. That's something I think that will be interesting to watch. For me, that would be the place where once you see that look, you're going to have your hot route ready. Just make sure that the read is correct. Because last year, I think, and we've also seen this in the past, where when Vance Joseph does look like he's about to bring a blitz pressure and then drops everyone back, we've seen a lot of quarterbacks get confused and have tossed the ball right to Arizona as a result. That's not something you can want to do if you're a Vikings team that we've talked about have really let teams get back into the games in the second half to be able, instead of putting teams away.
All right. I think that that's going to be kind of the most interesting battle in terms of the way the offenses and defenses play out. But I think that kind of the reason that that's so interesting is obviously not just because Arizona likes to blitz a lot. They send all of these creative types of blitzes. They try to overwhelm quarterbacks, but because they've built a personnel around the ability to basically do anything, have players replace other players in certain coverage or blitz looks and make that seem as if they've got all of their bases covered. I would say that the success rate for that sort of thing is somewhat limited. They've not succeeded in every capacity in that way, but it leads to getting athletes like Isaiah Simmons. It leads to getting athletes like Zaven Collins. It leads to, having safeties like Budda Baker, right? It makes a defense that is very versatile in some ways, or at least attempts to be. I do want to talk a little bit about Zaven Collins, who I think he went a little bit higher in the draft than a lot of people anticipated because he came from a somewhat smaller school, but he was a huge guy, great athlete. And it seems like the past couple of games, he's had a couple of highlight moments. How has that linebacker group looked?
Yeah, it's been kind of sometimes a struggle. The Cardinals actually in camp had Nick Vigil, a former Viking, was basically starting for them at one point. And they've kind of now had a rotation of other linebackers in to be able to free up Isaiah Simmons to kind of move him around into some of those different matchup roles. Simmons had at one point had his snap count had really just declined a whole lot, which has been interesting. While Zaven Collins, on the other hand, has been pretty much on the field for almost every down. There's been issues with Vance Joseph's defense where it seems like that the eyes aren't always in the right place for some of their linebackers, whether that's either in the run game or against the pass. Sometimes you'll see their eyes get sucked upfield, and then a running back will take a cutback lane to great effect. So it'll be interesting. They have, at least in the last 2 weeks, it seemed like they've maybe turned a bit of the corner. Obviously, with the interception for a touchdown in kind of that middle of the field coverage that Simmons had against Andy Dalton last week. I think really with Zaven, it seems like that it's been a little bit slower, but he's kind of seemingly found his niche into that defense of, some of the stuff that came down was little things like playing in with and tackling with his shoulder. But you can really see the athleticism pop when you're actually can watch him like staying in coverage on different guys, being able to make some of those tackles. It seems like that he's kind of blossomed a little bit more there, because that was the whole conversation coming out was, is he this athletic edge rusher that you're going to put at the inside linebacker? Because Arizona, they've never done that before with their draft picks. No siree. They've done that quite often with their draft picks. I think a lot of it's come down to when you see that athleticism on the field, that mental error that you can see for the most part has seemingly been cut down a bit more. And that I think has been helpful because ultimately the Cardinals have wanted to have a man coverage, very athletic over the middle of the field type of defense that then allows Jalen Thompson and Budda Baker to kind of be able to, make plays on the ball or make tackles. And when the season started, Simmons and Collins were essentially just letting the Chiefs essentially take whatever they wanted across the middle. It seems like that they've made some adjustments since then, and it's not been quite as bad, but it's not like that's necessarily been, it's not like the whole, the days of Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright or, the Niners linebackers that you're talking about. They still have had some issues, and I think that's one of the avenues that it'll be interesting to see if you can get some of those matchups because, for better or for worse, the Cardinals have decided to go all in on this kind of a hybrid type of defense. And, for better or worse, the front office and the coaching staff has seemed to just not be on the same page thus far. And it seems like at least finally the Cardinals are getting some of their young talent actually on the field and playing at a decent level, if not, as high of a level as, say, some other veteran players like J.J. Watt and DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've kind of talked mostly in reference to that secondary group. You've mentioned that Antonio Hamilton has gotten a lot of playing time. We see Byron Murphy playing out there. We mentioned Budda Baker. I know that Jalen Thompson was on the injury report. It sounds like he'll play. You'll have to correct me when it's
he should be playing.
Okay, cool. And then I'm also really curious about Marco Wilson, who I have judged to be not quite very good at cornerback.
Yeah, Marco is interesting because he's got all of the plays and makings of what could be a great cornerback, and then you've got areas where when he's not in like a sticky man coverage that he's had struggles at least too, giving up some big plays, tackling at least sometimes has been an issue. Hamilton's one of those guys who, when you talk about like your undrafted free agents who got kind of a chip on their shoulder, it's kind of one of those things that's really funny. He went up against DK Metcalf in the Seahawks game and made a pass breakup and then started jawing at him. Like, all right, if there's one person in the world I'm going to probably not jaw at, it's Aaron Donald is number one, and then it's going to be like DK Metcalf number two. And essentially then the next play they throw at him, he gets the pass breakup even knowing like the ball's coming his way, and then continues to jaw at the Seahawks line. So you're like, all right, you love having that kind of confidence at cornerback. It's something Arizona was missing. He got into a kind of bizarre frying accident where it was a grease fire that went all over his legs, suffered, I think, 2nd-degree burns. Like it was I think it was at least 48 to 72 hours in the burn unit in the ICU. And he's worked his way back onto the field. He's been probably one of their better guys in coverage this season. He's not been quite where Byron Murphy has been as far as being able to shut guys down, but he's a much better cornerback too than a Marco Wilson, who's a lot of times has that athleticism that you like to see, but due to that athleticism, and this was something that I remember of early Patrick Peterson as a Cardinal, he would trust that athleticism so much that the technique would go out the window, and he was nearly the mental side of the game that Patrick Peterson was. So I think as long as you've got a staple of Byron Murphy, Antonio Hamilton, and Marco Wilson, it's an adequate corner group. It's not like it was as bad as a corner group that I think that a lot of Cardinals fans thought it was going to be heading into the year. You can credit some of that for Vance Joseph's development. It's still a secondary that I think can, get the ball passed on for the most part. Vance Joseph, whenever they've gone from man coverage to zone coverage, Arizona just does not seem to quite be in the right place. They've let up a lot of underneath yards as a result, or having one sometimes broken tackle and a guy can be gone just due to the fact that for one reason or another, the Cardinals in man coverage have been fantastic. And when they're in zone, it just has been leaving something to be desired.
All right, fair enough. As always, you've given us an extraordinary amount of information. I was reading up on Antonio Hamilton's burn issue, which quite the story I'll link to in an accounting of it. I am sure, of course, that this leads to burn jokes for a cornerback. I don't see how it is possible to avoid that.
Yeah, I was going to say, we've had with Greg Dortch earlier this year, people had to try to figure out what was the best nickname for someone like him. And eventually came, instead of him being torching him, he dorched him was kind of, I think, the nickname that
there you go. That's good. Yeah.
So it's like, there's plenty of those, I think, to be going around, I think, for nicknames. But
yeah. Special teams real quick. This is kind of an unusual situation. The Cardinals, it seems like, would prefer to have Matt Prater. Matt Prater is returning from an injury and are determining basically on game day whether or not Prater will be a full kicker. And by that, I guess you were telling me he could do both kickoffs and field goal extra points, or will be a limited participant kicker as a kickoff specialist. As for people in the Norse Code League, this is actually a very important distinction. If he were to not kick, I think you know what we're talking about. If he were to not kick field goals and extra points, that would be the guy they just picked up, Rodrigo Blankenship, he of the glasses. How does that work out? How is the kickoff coverage in general? Because the Vikings, apparently, the special teams coordinator said today, like, we got something cooking up. We're going to get some kickoff return touchdowns, which, Kene Wangu had a pair last year despite only being healthy for 8 games. So certainly in the cards. What do you think is going to happen with this whole kicking operation.
Yeah, so Arizona's been interesting. They've had, I think, Ezekiel Turner got beat up a bit. They actually had cut Deontay Thompson, who had taken over as like the personal punt protector after he blew a punt against the Eagles. Matt Prater's been hurt. He hurt his hip, and it just has not gotten back to normal. Interestingly, for the Cardinals, their special teams against the Eagles and the Seahawks is so bad that, Matt Amendola was listed as the kicker, but Benjamin may have been the best kicker on the Cardinals at that time. He was the running back who took over, and I think Squibb kicked it like twice or something like that since Prater couldn't go back in. Amendola, at least, he made one field goal from, I think it was the 2-yard line, and then missed extra points, missed field goals. Blankenship made a 50-yarder last week. I think that was a huge confidence builder for the Cardinals because, they kept Amendola for another week against the Seahawks, and then they just would not let him back into the game to kick anything. They went for it on 4th down and for 2 points repeatedly. I think that what Cliff Kingsbury said is that Prater's day-to-day, which, when Cliff Kingsbury said day-to-day for Kyler Murray last year, Murray had probably a 6-week injury, we've come to find out. So, when he said day-to-day, like we assume that means we assume that he means he's alive, but he may not live till Sunday. Like that's what day-to-day kind of is. Like
that's
like the Kyle Shanahan approach.
Danielle Hunter's tweak in his neck. Okay,
oh, gosh. I was gonna say the Kyle Shanahan approach. Like I don't know if Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be alive on Sunday. Type of a joke. And like that's what Cliff Kingsbury is with day-to-day. Like Rodney Hudson's been day-to-day for the past month, baby. So he said that Prater. So he said Prater could just handle place kicking duties and Rodrigo Blankenship could handle kickoffs. We'll see if it comes to that for the most part. I just wonder if it is end up being one more week of Blankenship. They hold off on Prater for a bit. But the fact that they were at least able to see Blankenship make some of those kicks last week, I think was definitely a confidence booster. The Cardinals have not had any issues for the most part being able to move the ball. Where they've struggled a lot this year has actually been in the red zone and having to settle for 3. Part of that is because you've got 2 of your best weapons in the red zone, and DeAndre Hopkins and James Conner have both been out due to suspension or injury. If it does come down to one of those places where Rodrigo Blankenship is, having to kick a 45-yard field goal for, the win, it's just been one of those years for Arizona. It wouldn't shock me if there is a big special teams play that comes into it. I know Arizona did have, I believe, a punt blocked against the Seahawks. They've also almost had a punt blocked this year. I believe the Seahawks one was also returned for a touchdown right in the end zone. That's one of the places that they've got a good special teams coach in Jeff Rodgers, who when they can get teams into those unfavorable positions, they do a good job watching film, being able to use some different trick plays, being able to move the ball. It'll be interesting, I think, to see if special teams does play a factor because goodness, it has the last couple of weeks for Arizona. It just was fortunate that it seems like with Blankenship back there, maybe they're past that, but I wouldn't rule anything out until Matt Prater is back fully healthy and good to go. This is the same Prater that I think they trusted him to kick like a, was that 62-yarder against the Jaguars last year?
Yeah.
And of course it was returned 109 yards for a touchdown. I was like, all right, Cliff, we know you trust your kicker. I wish you would trust your kicker a little less, Cliff. Just a little less.
So the Vikings are 3rd, I think, in EPA generated by special teams. So you seem pretty confident in the special teams unit. Should be kind of an interesting matchup. But that is the last over-exhaustive detail that we will cover. That's what this podcast is known for. That's why we keep on inviting you back. So thank you so much for that. Now, you said that you thought it might be a 31-30 game for the Cardinals on the road against the Vikings on your podcast. Now in the hot seat in enemy territory digitally, as it were. Do you stick by that prediction?
I mean, I was saying, I think I went with you on my podcast saying I was going to go for the Vikings. I think this could be
I've characterized you, so now you have to stick with the guns.
Now I have to stick with it. I stick with the guns, of course.
Yeah.
So I was going to say I could flip it at least around and say I'll pick the Cardinals here on the Enemy podcast because I do think that it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. The fact that Arizona with Hopkins back seems to be a different team is going to be interesting. Like one of the stats that's been surprising is when DeAndre Hopkins and JJ Watt have been on the field for Arizona, they're basically 9-0. Like they haven't lost a game with both of them on the field. Unfortunately, due to injuries and suspensions, they haven't been on the field that much for Arizona. So
it's just been 9 games.
It's been 9 games. That's the thing. And it's like, all right, so we'll see what goes on. I do think that the strength of the Cardinals and the strength of the Vikings, I think that some of those are going to play a little bit to Arizona's favor of getting pressure up the middle on Cousins. It's really going to come down to how well I think that the teams can run the ball. Not like to say that, run the ball like crazy, but that is, I think, what opens up stuff for a lot of your offense. If Arizona is able to kind of take advantage and Dalvin Cook doesn't, isn't able to find free running room to get back into these 2nd and 12 type of situations. That's, I think, what will play into their hands. Whereas for the Vikings, you're going to want to make sure that Kyler Murray is bottled up, that he's not feeling like he can just take off at any type of manner. I think this could be a spot that Arizona could pull it out. They've played historically under Cliff Kingsbury better on the road, surprisingly, through the last 2 seasons. I just have a feeling like that if it may come down to a kicking situation, usually you pick the healthier team, which is why I went with the Vikings on the last podcast. We'll see what happens in this game. If the Cardinals are able to get a couple of nice matchups, at least, of being able to get Hopkins or maybe even a Dortch open on some of these other plays, then maybe the Arizona's got a chance in this game to pull a little bit of an upset. I do have Arizona, at least. I think I did have them covering the spread. I think that you had the Vikings covering the spread. I at least had Arizona being able to cover the spread, but I'd still pick them for a loss on my podcast.
Fair enough. You've emphasized that multiple times, so I think viewers or listeners have figured out that I just put you in a corner and expected you to live up to that corner.
Hey, it's what friends do, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. See if I invite you back in my podcast again is kind of the thing, right?
Thanks so much for coming on, man. Where can people find you?
You can follow on Twitter at BlakeMurphy7, as well as follow all our stuff at revengeofthebirds.com. It's been a crazy little Cardinals season. I think a lot of the fan base has been very frustrated by hoping that expectations would be high for the team this year. It hasn't quite lived up to that billing, but hey, everyone in the NFC West is at 3-4, and we'll see if the wide open NFC is able to, mean this is a larger lead for the Vikings, or if Arizona is kind of able to claw their way back in it. Because goodness knows that we've had enough of these bad seasons as being Arizona sports and Minnesota sports fans that a good game on Sunday would go a long way for not just entertainment purposes, but maybe our sanity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be nice to see a clean game from somebody at this point. Thanks so much, man.
Hey, I appreciate you having me on.
All right, let's go to the mailbag, and the first question is from Cody, who asks, so far this season, the Cardinals' defense has done a very poor job containing opposing teams' tight ends. Considering the fact that he has been having a down year, do you think this week's game against the Cardinals could be a breakout game of sorts for Irv Smith Jr.?
I would find that actually pretty... I mean, it would be pretty fun, right? It'd be a new storyline to talk about. I think that that's kind of unlikely, in part because one of the issues with Irv Smith is that it seems like he has lost the ability to catch the football a bit more consistently, which, by the way, completely understandable, right? Because he had thumb surgery. I feel like, again, this is the sort of thing that's related. And maybe he's fully healed now, and that's not going to be an issue. But for the most part, I feel like that's not something that you can just match up your way out of. Let's take a quick look at tight ends that played the Cardinals. I've got a search going right now that is sorted by fantasy points. That feels like it's maybe relevant. So the tight ends that have done really well include Travis Kelce, who had 18.1 normal fantasy points or 26 PPR points. Juwan Johnson. Let's see, we've got Rashid Shaheed. Now he's a receiver. Darren Waller. Yeah, I mean, these tight ends have done all right, but also remember that 2 of them are like elite receiving tight ends. One of them is Taysom Hill, which doesn't really count in the same way. Yeah, there's not as much. I think that I've been talking to Cardinals fans, and they're always concerned about opposing tight ends. And, from a matchup perspective, I think you get it because Isaiah Simmons has been a huge liability in coverage. But you're taking a look at which tight ends actually, I don't know, man. It doesn't tell me much that Travis Kelce was a bad matchup for you, right? Okay, yeah, that makes sense. He would be. He's a very good tight end. Juwan Johnson is kind of the most interesting one because he's the one backing up Adam Trautman in New Orleans. But whether there's a real opportunity here, there might be just from looking at the matchups. But I think that the primary issue is just that Irv Smith has had difficulty catching the ball.
All right, next question is going to be from Eli, who asks, what do you expect the balance of Jordan Hicks versus Brian Asamoah to be? And who do you think fits better in the QB spy type role?
I think that we kind of naturally assume that the faster player is a better QB spy, but obviously the reason that you ask this question is because that might not be the case. You want somebody that's a little bit better at reading the quarterback, getting a little bit more in terms of open field tackles and not getting juked out and stuff like that. And I don't know that actually that Brian Asamoah has that skill set. I don't know that he doesn't have that skill set, but I don't know that he definitely has that skill set. Now, people have been asking about this because we saw Asamoah take more snaps over the past couple of games. I think a couple of games ago it was 3 snaps. The most recent game it was 6 snaps, and that is not that meaningful to me. I don't know that they're really easing him into the same way that the Vikings eased in Anthony Barr before they decided to start him. I think like 5 games into the season or something like that. This feels pretty substantially different, and it's not like he was doing. He's got like 1 tackle. He gave up a play in coverage. I don't know that he's doing so amazingly that he deserves to see the field, but there's been a lot of discussion about it from Vikings fans. I think that Hicks, he is very limited in terms of what he can do, so he's not a really great quarterback spy. But I don't know why like he has to be the quarterback spy. Obviously, if like Lewis Cine was healthy, he'd probably be a better option. But Eric Kendricks is probably better than both of them in terms of being a quarterback spy. And I know that takes Eric Kendricks out of coverage. But when you've got a quarterback that's not throwing over the middle of the field like Kyler Murray, you can probably sacrifice that a little bit, so long as you don't have to worry about crossers, right? So, I think that Hicks is. No, actually, Asamoah is still probably the better quarterback spy, but I think it's just closer than people would seem to assume based on that athleticism. I think the athleticism advantage is what swings it, but the fact that we know that he can break down open field tackles, makes that a pretty close competition. So, yeah. But I don't expect Asamoah to take, a huge role or anything like that. I don't think that, we're seeing that happening. I think that Asamoah. I don't think that we're going to see more than like 6 or 8 snaps for Asamoah versus something like Hicks, somebody like Hicks who has basically the balance of the rest of the game.
Alex asks, is Cameron Bynum horrible in coverage, or is his perfect passer rating when targeted more due to other factors? It seems unlikely that he's just playing awfully.
Yeah, I mean, he's only been targeted 11 times, and when when you have like basically 6 games of data on who's been targeted and what they've been targeted, and they're at a position that doesn't get targeted all that often anyway, like safety, as opposed to like cornerback or linebacker. These small samples are going to kind of overwhelm things. So he's given up 2 touchdowns, and those 2 touchdowns on 11 targets are just going to produce a really high passer rating. So it's not really a good indication of how good in coverage somebody is, especially if they haven't been targeted all that often, because it might mean that when they're not targeted, they're actually doing a really good job and they're deterring, throws deep downfield, which means, that's a safety that you want on your team. So I think that is more just a product of sample size. I think from a coverage perspective, he's only had 2 games where you've been really worried about what he's been able to do. In one of those games, he gave up 1 reception for 4 yards and it was a touchdown. And his passer rating given up in that game was 122.9. Like that seems kind of like an unfair way to evaluate a low volume player. So I'm not too concerned. He definitely made a couple of mistakes, but overall, he is a pretty solid player. I think that his restricting him to a free safety role might be best for him, and that's what he does in this defense, which is not something that you'd get with maybe a healthy Lewis Cine, who has the defense fully memorized and part of what he can do. But no, I don't. This does not concern me, the passer rating thing, just because it's such a low sample at a position that does not generate that many targets for you to be able to divide that by. So I think that he's looked all right in coverage. I don't know.
John Belk asks, which team has better odds of winning a Super Bowl? A good team that has to try to make the playoffs from scratch, or an average team that's guaranteed to make the playoffs, like the Vikings?
I kind of like that question. So for this, I assumed that an average team would have a successively smaller chance of winning in each round and made the playoffs as a wild card, because if so long as we're doing this, like, why would we give this team the top seed and home field advantage? So this average team is consistently on the road. They are not as good as other playoff opponents on average. And so they have about a 45% chance of winning game 1, a 35% chance of winning game 2, a 25% chance of winning the next 2 games each. So that's kind of because, a 75% chance is pretty overwhelming, but for a conference championship game or a Super Bowl, I think that would be fair for an average team on the road. So I calculated that, and I also calculated that against the likelihood a really good team, like a high-level team that wins 70% of its games, and on average, and a pretty good team that wins about 60% of its games. I shouldn't say pretty good, quite a good team that wins about 60% of its games. So I looked at both of them, and I saw that their odds of just making the playoffs were, let me just real quickly, the team that wins 70% of its games making the playoffs, their odds are about 88%. And I didn't do perfect math on this. I just assumed that any team that had 10 wins or more made the playoffs, and any team that had 13 wins or more earned the top seed. And generally speaking, that'll be right. I think for the purposes of this math, it does. So they make the playoffs about 87, 88% of the time. Fantastic. The other team, the one that wins 60% of its games, also makes the playoffs fairly frequently. They make the playoffs. Let's see. Let's do this quickly. They make it about 63% of the time. 63 to 65% of the time. Great. So you've got an 88% and 65% chance, depending on what your definition of an above average team is. Once they make the playoffs, their chances of winning the Super Bowl are 8% for that first team and about 5% for that second team. So if we kind of multiply those percentages together, you've got 3% for the above average team and 7% for the very good team. The odds of that average team on the road consistently doing what they're doing is about less than 1%. So actually an average team going on the road, winning 4 consecutive games, those odds are very small. Think about, what the odds are just in general for winning 4 consecutive games. It's really tough to do that in the NFL. The fact that the Vikings have done it is very fascinating, right? But that doesn't mean that that's something they'll be able to do going forward. It's just, it's so notable that, we talk about it. If it was any other year, we wouldn't be talking about it. And so we wouldn't remember it one way or the other. It's hard to win 4 games in a row. It's hard to win 4 games in a row against good opponents. It's easier to do that when you've got home field advantage. It's easier to do that when you're a better team. So even though we're guaranteeing a playoff berth and setting one of the odds percentages at 100% instead of 88% or 65%, it is still better to be an above average team entering the playoffs by like a factor of like 8.
Related to that, John Belk also asks, how much should the Vikings be willing to damage the future to maximize their almost guaranteed playoff spot? Would you be in favor of all-in moves like trading for Stephon Gilmore?
Yeah, I don't know when the next time the Vikings are going to make the playoffs is, and we don't know if they'll be able to construct a team next year that will substantially improve over the current team. And if it doesn't improve over the current team, they're not going to make the playoffs next year because they'll be an average team. So, hey, the Vikings are on a course to make the playoffs. Absolutely, they should make an all-in move at this point, which, I don't normally like, because I think that if you're not a very good team, you should probably, pack it in, right? You should maximize your opportunities for growth and development and minimize kind of your sacrifices in that direction. Especially if you've got a head coach who's got, basically, I'm not going to say he's guaranteed, but basically has perfect job security at the moment, and a front office with the same thing. You might as well build for the future. But yeah, I don't know if they'll make the playoffs next year. Almost certainly they'll make the playoffs this year. I say almost. I've seen these Vikings before.
Yeah. We both know the Vikings are not to be trusted. That's the law. Yeah.
But you might as well improve your worst position with a high level player like Stephon Gilmore, if that is possible, right? I don't know if the Bills will give him up. I know that the Bills are very happy with their cornerback play right now without him. So, yeah, I would be in favor of that. Obviously, it depends on cost and compensation and all that, but that'd be pretty cool. Also, the Vikings have the lowest cap space in the league, so this would be a very difficult get.
Yeah. Dustin asks, with this Donatel bend don't break defense that constantly just about breaks game after game, don't you think it's about time to make the adjustment to bring the corners down closer so they don't get burned play after play? Or what adjustments need to be made?
If you bring the corners down, they're actually more likely to get burned deep and less likely to get burned short. And very often the corners, when they're getting beat in the system right now, are getting beat short. The idea, in theory, is that it takes a lot of 3 and 5 yard gains to gain 40 yards, right? And there's going to be some mistakes along the way. that's not really bearing out for the Vikings. They need to just play better football. But I'm not against press coverage. I just think that if your goal is to not get burned, press coverage is not necessarily the solution, right? It could be you're playing, your two deep safeties to genuinely play two deep zones, then have those corners roll up in like a classic Bud Carson style cover two and jam at the line and let the safeties help your cornerbacks if they miss their jams. But I don't think that that's going to prevent big plays. I think they should do that anyway. I think that they should roll up to the line of scrimmage and be a little bit more aggressive. I think that would take advantage of some of the stuff that Patrick Peterson still has left in terms of his physical strength. I think that he doesn't have, speed or agility in the same way. And I think that if you're playing off coverage, agility is a little bit more important. But, it takes away from the fact that Peterson gets to have more of his eyes on the rest of the defense and take advantage of his knowledge and wisdom and experience. Still, I think that rolling him up to the line of scrimmage a little bit more often, I think would improve his coverage capability. Dan sorts, it kind of depends on the receiver he's up against. You could do either. But yeah, I think that would be a good thing. I just think that, saying that, burned play after play is maybe the wrong way to put it. Alternately, the adjustments that need to be made could be technique issues in terms of making sure that when they're in off coverage, they do a better job of closing, of reading quarterbacks, of making sure that their hips aren't turned the wrong way. Zimmer did a very good job of this when he was coaching defensive backs, in producing man turns in zone coverage in order to kind of close down on guys. So there are a couple of ways to do it. One of those ways is to play better football, which is obviously unsatisfying, but I think that you have to kind of live with that risk a little bit if you're the Vikings, because the current defensive approach is not working.
Next question is from Kenneth Allen, who asks, following up on last episode, how common is it to start a young player, bench them for a newly traded player, and then the younger player develops into a long-term starter? Isn't there a worry that trading for someone could ruin someone like Ingram's development?
I don't think it's very common, but it doesn't strike me as something that is so uncommon that it is alarming. I'm trying to think if that had happened to Kyle Fuller with Chicago, because I know that he didn't play a full 2014. But in either instance, I would say that the lack of a precedent here doesn't really bother me, just because I don't see, like, if it would like shoot his confidence down. I don't know that you'd be in a spot where he was going to be on a path to be a very good player anyway, because he's going to hit a lot of hurdles if he continues to play at this level. So yeah, it's not good. I don't know what to say. He's just not playing well, and so it'd be good to get. It would be okay. So Fuller started late because Charles Tillman sustained a triceps injury. That makes sense. But Ingram is playing poorly enough that, shattering his long-term development is just as likely to come on the field as it is off the field. But I don't think benching someone necessarily hurts their development too much, especially if they're beginning to develop bad habits that you need them to break out of. That is the primary concern. So it doesn't seem like it's all that common, but it also is something I'm okay with doing, because I think that, maybe for a quarterback, it impacts, kind of the perception of leadership and the interaction with the rest of the team. And that matters a lot. For another position, especially for something like guard, I think that matters a good deal less, especially because I think Ingram is hurting his long-term development out there right now, because he's putting in patterns of behavior that are problematic for long-term play.
Ben asks, why are we getting so few penalties, and is that sustainable? Are we well coached or just lucky?
Well, one of the reasons that they're getting so few penalties is because they're just allowing completions, right? It's easy to not commit pass interference if you're not near the receiver. But
boy, that is just a problem in and of itself, though. Like, that's
yeah.
Oh, you can't get PI.
That's not a compliment.
Yeah, if you can't get PI if you just let him catch the ball. Like, yeah. Boy, I hadn't thought about. Wait, is that why they keep scoring? Crap.
No, but it does seem like they are a pretty well coached unit. I would say maybe they're not as aggressive as they need to be. I think that this lack of penalties thing is definitely a good thing, but sometimes it can signal something that you want in your team. So yeah, I think it's sustainable, right? I think that if you take a look at teams with low penalty rates and teams with high penalty rates halfway through the season and project how they do at the end of the season in terms of that same statistic, penalty rate, they will, like almost every statistic at the extremes, will regress towards the mean a little bit, but they don't regress as hard as something like turnover differential or fumble luck or any of the other kind of, watch out for this regression statistic, close game record, right? Those, if you had just pinned it to be completely average for the rest of the year, you would be correct way more often than not, which is not the case with penalties. Penalties tend to be a little bit sticky, even if the highest rated penalties and lowest rated penalties are probably going to regress at least a little bit. There's a couple of reasons for this. Some of this is pretty good coaching. Some of this is talent. If you are less talented, you are more likely to commit a penalty in order to kind of make up for it. And that's not just true at defensive back. If you are not a very good tackle and you're up against Khalil Mack, you're going to want to gain a little bit of extra ground and jump the snap as often as possible in order to get that extra ground. And so you might false start a little bit more. Or if you get beaten as an offensive tackle, the way to save your quarterback might be to tug on a jersey a little bit, something you wouldn't have to do if you were winning the rep. So some of that's talent, right? Some of that you're not committing penalties because of talent. But yeah, the way that you practice, the way that you coach, maybe it's doing a better job of figuring out how to deal with game noise, which will prevent you from doing like false starts and encroachments and stuff like that. I think that is good. I think it's sticky. I think that there is maybe a lack of physicality in parts of the team that correlate with a low penalty rate, which is something worth at least investigating. But generally speaking, I don't think that this is a case of extreme luck. That said, I think the Vikings will commit more penalties from here on out because they have such a low rate that it's probably just going to regress, even if their true value is a low penalty team. It's just going to seem like more penalties from here on out.
Derek McKenzie asks an important question. If you're a 6 foot plus defensive lineman and you sack Kyler Murray, how is it possible not to hit his head? This kind of goes along the same lines as there's been discussions on. I remember a Deadspin post where Drew Magary was arguing with somebody over whether or not you could just field a team with people under 5 feet because their like strike zone to be so incredibly small, they'd have to just be walked every time. So it's like it's a bit like that. Or there was a professional wrestler promoter in the late 80s by the name of Jim Herd, terrible at what he did, but he had this idea for a hunchback wrestler. And in wrestling, you have to pin the guy's shoulders to the mat, but you can't do that if he's a hunchback. So how do you beat him? That becomes the question. Like,
how do you beat him?
Exactly. So Kyler Murray being, tiny, but yet having the deepest voice in all of Gridiron Heights, how do you beat him? How do you sack him?
This also reminds me of the movie Ed, the one where they get a chimpanzee to play baseball. Of all of the "this animal plays a sport" movies, probably one of the worst ones.
Are you saying Air Bud would have been better?
Air Buds 1 through 15.
Oh God,
1 through 15. Air Bud volleyball, I'm sure, is better than Ed. This movie is bad. It's really bad. But the appeal of the chimpanzee, aside from being a monkey, but the baseball appeal was that I guess technically an ape. Sorry. Is that his strike zone is so small, etc. Right? So and I know the MLB had a ruling at some point because somebody did bring a little person into a baseball game way back in the 1910s, because of course that's when all of the interesting stuff in baseball happened. And they had to make a ruling about it. They're like, yeah, sorry, you can't. That's screwed up. Can't do that.
Must be this tall to ride, sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't know. That seems like it's probably illegal, but against federal law. But we'll find out, I guess. But that's just, I guess that's how defense works. I don't know. Kyler Murray's been sacked a lot, so certainly they've figured it out. His strike zone is tiny. You have to be very precise. It's kind of like a heat-seeking missile. But be careful. Don't let Ed get the best of you.
So from stumptheump.com,
Oh, wow.
there is no written height minimum for Major League Baseball. However, the commissioner has the ability to void any contract on any baseball team, which is what happened to Eddie Gadel when he was inserted as a pinch hitter during a St. Louis Browns game after being signed by their first GM. The contract was void after his first game because the American League president felt that he was inserting a midget to, this is this quote from the website,
Right. Yeah, I understand.
was inserting a midget to pinch hit in order to make a mockery of the game.
In order to make a mockery of the game, that's just using the rules.
Yeah, that's
a mockery of the game. What year was it?
Was that 1910? I believe that was 1910.
Oh my God, I nailed the year. Holy crap.
It was it's ridiculous.
I'm so happy I nailed the year. Baseball is so dumb.
Let's go to a question that's curious as well. I'm trying to ignore the sound of Arif's ego inflating to fill the room. R. Menson asks, why is the running back trade market so active this year? I don't really remember running backs being traded much mid-season, but this year, Christian McCaffrey and Robinson have already been traded, and I've seen rumors about Hunt, Akers, and Gibson also being shopped. Is it an anomaly or something driving it? Could it be related to what you said recently about the increase in cover 2 type defenses and how offenses are reacting to that?
I think that plays a role. I don't think that is playing an enormous role, right? Because if you take a look at some of the most run-forward teams in the NFL, like the Cleveland Browns or the Detroit Lions that are also successful at running the ball, but don't rely on a quarterback helping them along the way, like with Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts, the Ravens and Eagles respectively. It's not because teams are not playing, or the teams are playing cover 2 against them. I assure you, against the Detroit Lions, teams are probably not going to play as much cover 2. They're not scared of Jared Goff beating them deep. They're scared of DeAndre Swift, right? They're not scared of Jacoby Brissett beating them deep. They're scared of Nick Chubb. So it will change what they do. I think that is playing a role, though, because we are seeing a little bit more effectiveness in the run game in terms of creating explosives, but even the run game is not as effective as you think it would be. We talked about that last episode of the Austin Eckler stuff because we're seeing more 5-man surfaces. So I don't think that that's playing a role. I think what's really happening, I shouldn't say not playing a role, I think it's only playing a small role that teams do think that there is some effectiveness in running. They want to invest in it. But I think that what's playing a bigger role is that running back talent in the league is probably at, I wouldn't say like maybe an all-time high, but there is a ton of really good running backs in the league. But just because of like a product of circumstance, they're just unevenly distributed. I think before you would say that, running back talented, it's never evenly distributed, but it had been somewhat equitably distributed. But now that the Browns have 2 starting quality running backs, and the Panthers had drafted 2 running backs that were pretty talented, and also while they had Christian McCaffrey, and the Washington Commanders did the exact same thing, the running back talent was distributed in an odd way. And this is just kind of a corrective in that way. And I think that variance is playing a pretty big role, right? Because if Breece Hall does not get injured, James Robinson probably doesn't get traded, right? Because they traded him for like a 6th round pick. Well, I guess a 5th, because he's probably going to get 600 yards, and that's the condition. But that is a guy that another example, by the way, of concentrated running back talent. James Robinson's the starting quality guy. Urban Meyer decided to draft a running back in the 1st round. It turns out he's pretty good too, right? And so I don't think the Jaguars would have made that trade if they didn't think that a 5th round pick was the best that they were going to get. And I think that if that's the case, the market for James Robinson actually was not all that great, right? So the Christian McCaffrey thing, I think, is just a product of the fact that they're playing with Jimmy Garoppolo. I bet if Trey Lance was healthy, they wouldn't do that because they wouldn't have felt the need to emphasize a short passing game that's very good at generating yards after the catch. But now that it is Garoppolo, and now that they've got a really great defense that they don't want to waste, they're going to make sure that the combination of Kittle, Juszczyk, Ayuk, Samuel, and now Christian McCaffrey, they all have the ability to catch passes, 3-4 yards down the field and turn them into potentially 20-yard gains, right? So I think that's what's happening. I don't think that it's the coverage shift. I think it's just the distribution of running back talent was in a really weird spot, relatively speaking. and teams that already had pretty good running backs drafted them, and those turned out to be the good running backs from that class. Actually, I don't actually know if Washington did a good job. I mean, I don't want to bag on the guy that just got back from getting shot, but I don't think he's all that great of a running back. But Washington certainly seems to think he is, in which case that puts Gibson on the trade market. But yeah, the talent distribution at running back is much weirder than I think it has been in the past, and this is just correcting for that.
So I have to correct something.
Uh-oh.
You were incorrect about the year. I've run it by 3 different websites. Baseball Reference has the player born. BaseballReference.com has him born in 1925, so that would have been impossible. The game itself was 1951.
51?
1951.
This was a post-war game?
Yep, 1951.
By view of these shenanigans, alters radically with this new information.
Yeah. This is
what?
I mean, if you need to yell at the ump and like kick dirt on him, yell at the ump and kick dirt on him. But we will continue on with the important questions of the day. Legend of Korra asks, "Can we distract Kyler by playing video games on the Jumbotron?" It's actually just going to be the loading screen for the new Call of Duty, and it'll just be that, just looping.
There's no rule that a dog can't play basketball.
Exactly. The Logic Dump asks, does Kyler travel with a PS5 or Xbox to away games, or does he use his, quote, gamer connections to have a console smuggled into each team hotel so the team is unaware of what he is doing when he should be doing, quote, independent study?
Okay, first of all, that clause is taken out of his contract. I just want to be clear. It no longer has an independent homework clause in his contract. They give the shortest quarterback in the league a homework. Sorry.
It was so... And the fact that it blew up to the extent that it did, that they took it out, is still just so funny.
Please, my boy has such tiny little arms. You can't do this to him.
And the deepest of voice on Gridiron Heights. It's such a great bit.
It's such a good bit. It's one of their best bits, period.
To me, it's better than Mahomes sounding like was it Kermit?
Yeah, it's Kermit.
It's so good. Andrew Shuba has a similar question. For Arif's cybercrime corner, what advice do you have for Kyler to circumvent the parental controls on his hotel room so that he can play Call of Duty this weekend? Also, what video game, other than the Jurassic Park mobile game, is most likely to significantly distract Kirk Cousins from film study? That guy had to be big into Candy Crush. Like, that guy crushed candy like there's nobody's business.
I feel like, so I watch obviously a lot of mobile ads because of my addiction to mobile games, and the easiest way to get free stuff is to watch ads, right? And the new turn in some of these ads is that they just get celebrity cameos to endorse a product. Like, oh man, I'm Scott Baio and I just love to relax. And people ask me, hey, Scott Baio, what do you do to relax? And I say, me, Scott Baio, you know what I do to relax? I play X mobile game. That's right. Here's what I like about X mobile game. And it's just like, all right, dude, you're an actor, so you're selling this really well. But I've not seen any Scott Baio ads. I just picked a guy at random. But like, you're an actor, so you're selling this weirdly well. But I cannot believe you. I feel like Cousins is going to be on that train at some point. Not because he needs the money, but because he's doing it for the love of the game, right? Like he just has a cameo willing to endorse a mobile game because he just loves doing that stuff. Not even for the love of the specific game I'm talking about, but for the love of the game of grinding, right? Of just being on Cameo, being asked to endorse products. I bet that he's really into that. So he's going to show up, and I don't know if it's going to be for Candy Crush. They do all right. Probably don't need any more advertising, but I could totally see it. Now, as for Kyler and how he can best enable his FaZe Clan career, I feel like that you should probably have contacts in every city. I think it's the gamer connections. Here's how you do it. Contacts in every city that allows you access to the console that you need. The parental controls, You could probably get around that by always having a router with you with a VPN installed into the software of the router that allows you to get around parental controls. That way, you don't have to go through the hotel's system because it's already encrypted. So that's probably the best way to do that. Good luck, Kyler. I believe in you.
Did you know there's a FaZe Clan Batman comic?
No, but my life has been made worse with this knowledge.
Yes, that is what I am here for. Apparently this was a thing that they had put out, and I don't know who your target market is for this, but don't. just don't do this. This is a terrible idea. Why would you do this? You should be ashamed. Damian Barrett asks, looking at the schedule, there's a number of, quote, winnable games left this year. What's the minimum number of wins that it would take for you to consider the Vikings to be a realistic challenger and not a playoff fraud? 12? 13? 14?
Okay. Remember when we were talking about the 2020 Packers? And we were like, oh yeah, they were frauds at 13-3. Remember when I was talking about the 2017 Vikings and I was like, yeah, they're 13-3. I think they're frauds. Like that, those wins did not stop me. Winning games does not convince me a team is good. I think we've been over that. Them doing the thing they're supposed to do does not impress me. No, I think that if they continue to win games ugly and it feels like, oh my God, there might be something in this, they're 8-1 or they're 10-2, they just keep winning games in ways that are surprising. They just have like the most grit. They never panic. They, figure out by the end of the game, they figured out what the other team does and they've adjusted a little bit better than everybody else. No, I don't believe you and I won't believe it. And if the Vikings are like 15-2, and they've only had one game that they've won by double digits all year, I'm going to project them to lose in the playoffs. So, no, there's not a number that you could give me.
Probably not, no. All20Q asks, which mistake of your own would you most want to have blamed on the ESPN Skycam wire? For those who missed this, for about 4 hours the other day on Twitter, there was a heated discussion over whether or not one of the interceptions that was thrown, that looked like it was a throwaway, actually had touched the Skycam wires. It was determined after the fact that it did not touch it, but it's fun to pretend that it did. So, Arif, which mistake of your own would you most want to blame on the Skycam wire?
All right, so in my sophomore year of college, I made the biggest mistake of my romantic life. It's the one you're thinking of, the one that everybody when they're young and they only make one mistake in their romantic life. It's that one. I cheated on my girlfriend. I hate it. I would love to have blamed the ESPN Skycam for that mistake. Babe, I'm sorry. Okay, I got a camera. Okay, just take a look at the camera phone here. Okay, you're going to have to zoom in because this is a 480p camera. Can you see that wire? ESPN Skycam. Now, this is important.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and hopefully ESPN does not release a statement in that scenario. Anyway, up until that point, the most important relationship of my life, I was devastated. It was my fault, but no longer. Now I blame ESPN Skycam.
Wow, I was thinking back to about 1999, 2000, somewhere around there. And I was helping a friend move out of his, he had some stuff in a storage locker that he was going to just be putting stuff in there when he went down to basic. So I was helping him put some stuff into his, in there. And I believe he was using his parents' van that particular day. And of all the things that he was putting into the garage, or into the storage unit rather, there was a BB gun or like an airsoft gun or something like that. And I had asked him if it was loaded, and he said no, it was not. And I believed him.
Ah, good. Well, problem solved.
And when I moved it, it was on top of like a box or something. I wasn't giving it proper, moving it properly, I suppose. but when it fell off of my box that I was carrying and hit the ground, and it fired the trigger, and it shot a BB through the back window of the guy's van that he was using from his parents, and that proceeded to shatter into a million pieces because it's safety glass. I was tripped by the ESPN Skycam wire. Unbeknownst to me, it was being used at that particular moment at this one location in North Dakota. It was being used near this particular storage unit, and I tripped over that, and that was why the gun fired, and proceeded to shoot an airsoft thing or BB through the back window of the van. It's not my fault.
ESPN, dude. ESPN Skycam. Babe, please zoom in onto the camera.
Listen, zoom in on this non-existent photo on a Nokia. Here, just play Snake for a bit, and I'll explain what happened. All right, like this is what happened. All right, Chad asks for a Reeves conflict resolution corner. Oh, this will be good.
Oh no!
When things are going badly, the team is losing.
No, before the answer is ESPN Skycam.
Obviously, when things are going badly, the team is losing, and you're playing worse than expected. Is it more effective to talk about it with your teammates, coaches, or a retired punter? Which will yield the desired results? We really could have gone 12 rounds on just like a couple of lines from his latest McAfee appearance. Rodgers proceeded to explain that things are going well. What are you talking about? Also, we're making double-digit mental mistakes, and people who are doing that shouldn't be starting. So he's gonna sit for Jordan Love? Like, what are you doing?
I just like, who does he throw to if he benches every receiver who makes multiple mental mistakes a game, man? Who are you throwing? Is it just Randall Cobb?
He's injured. He's hurt.
Oh my God, no! Who does he throw to? It's not Amari Rodgers, who is on the trade block, I guess. I don't know why anyone would want him.
I saw Justice tweet out, somebody was like, who are the Packers going to trade for receiver? And he responded with like, Vantez Scantling. Like, that's who they're going to cut back.
God, Justice has such a unique brain. You know how in A Beautiful Mind, Russell Crowe, his character has difficulty relating to other people, but which I don't actually think is the story of The Economist this is about, like Nash, right? Whatever. But you know, it's a movie, and he has trouble relating to other people, but he's got a perfect understanding, not just of math, but of game theory, a thing that I guess, according to the movie, he invents. And no one really understands how his brain really comes to these conclusions. They are just kind of, they emerge to other people. They emerge perfectly formed, well explained. And for some reason they're about picking up girls in a bar, but they're also, they also win the Nobel Prize. Now Justice is like the inverse of that, because it is uncomfortable how much people like him and how he relates to other people, and also out of his brain emerge fully formed, imperfect thoughts that are somehow useful.
I mean, he's not been wrong about a lot of things here, though he never responds to my messages anymore. I want to know if Aaron Rodgers is coming back, and he's not responding. I feel like he would have inside knowledge on that.
Marquez Valdes-Scantling, that's good.
That was
the answer, by the way, of course, is retired punters. After Pat McAfee, hit up Chris Cluey. I'm sure that'll go well.
Yes. Wow. Brian Jellerson asks, for a Reeves Dear God Why corner, imagine a world in which all sports are erased from existence and the only two options for you to employ your investigative journalism skills are bees and witches. Which do you choose? I don't think that pun was intended, but it was still good.
Bees and witches.
You got a lot of compliments on the witch thing last week, which is only going to... God, I hate this pun thing, which is only going to like encourage him. So keep that in mind, folks.
By the way you said journalism and the way Brian Jellerson probably typed out journalism, and just because there's probably a tone mismatch there. So you sounded a little sarcastic, James. I
listen. You're like the third person this week to tell me I've been too negative. So don't even. don't get me started.
When a Reef says you're being too negative, I maybe self-evaluate a little bit.
Take about 20% off there, Squirrely Dan. All right, we'll see.
I probably witches, because I'm never going to be a subject matter expert in bees, because frankly, you can get away with less. There's a lot of scientific studies on bees. Witches, I could probably just say stuff, right? Like,
you've already done enough to like have like a cryon on your with your face if you appear on like History Channel or something.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So
witch talk expert, yeah.
Boy,
a guy without a TikTok account becomes expert on witches on TikTok.
That's where we're going. That's where all of this has been heading. This is now. The future is now. Children, let's do this. Kyle Slaby asks, "What's your favorite horror film to watch on All Hallows Eve?" Mine is a scary indie film called Minnesota at Chicago 2016.
I feel like this question was asked just so they could say the name of the film. Congrats, Kyle. The film's name is out there. I'm not a huge scary movie guy. Obviously, if I'm like with a group of a bunch of people and they all want to watch scary movies, it's a ton of fun to watch. Like, Jason with a ton of people or whatever. But if it's just me, or if it's me and my partner, or just a small group of people, I don't really like scary movies all that much. Which is why I choose The Ring, because that movie is not remotely terrifying at all.
See, and I just like I some of the older stuff, but like when it comes to like The Shining. The Shining is one of my favorites, and it took a long time for me to like actually sit down and watch it.
But do you watch that on Halloween? I feel like you just watch that. Right? It feels like it's not a Halloween movie.
You know what's funny? The first time I watched it was after a Super Bowl, so it was like in February.
Wow.
I didn't watch. Like, I've watched a bunch of Kubrick films. I, for whatever reason, just refused to watch The Shining until like 8 years ago or something like that. 8-9 years ago. Yeah, and then I watched it. I was like, oh, this is now one of my favorites. If it's like scary movie time or whatever, it's like 28 Days Later or something like that. But otherwise, yeah. Kyle Slaby also asks, Jake Kumarau gets the revenge game of a lifetime this weekend. What stat line does the former Packer need to have in order for Rodgers to retire in disgust during the game, Antonio Brown style? I feel like you're missing the fact that this is happening at Bills, where there was a famous retirement at halftime.
Yeah, Vontae Davis.
Yeah,
right?
it's missing the Vontae Davis thing. So what would Jake Kumarau have to do in order to make Rodgers retire at halftime?
What are the odds that he's even active? Has he been active for the Bills yet? It feels like that's kind of a stretch, right? Let's see. Buffalo Bills, parentheses, second stint. Josh Allen joked that Kumarau was his favorite wide receiver. 2022, Kumarau signed a 1-year contract extension with the Bills. He was released on June 16th, but re-signed later that day, as the move is a procedural roster management move. Okay, so Wikipedia does not have anything on his 2022. But Pro Football Reference usually tells us if somebody was active by listing the number of games. Let's take a look at Jake Kumarau on Pro Football Reference. He was active for 3 games, caught 4 passes over the course of 2 games on 5 targets, started against Tennessee. So good chance he'll start this game, I think. Stat line, I think, honestly, 80 yards. I don't think it has to be all that high. I think Rodgers' frustration with the way things are going right now in Green Bay leads to a fairly low trigger on these things. I wonder if any. Yeah, we have had Packers have at least 80 yards in a game, but I just feel like it would probably be notable if it got to 80 yards, right? Yeah, Allen Lazard at 116. Not many Packers to choose from to hit 80 yards. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm going to go with 80 yards.
Jeez.
And Rodgers is just out.
Yeah. Logan asks, if Arif is Kwesi and Packers ownership calls asking for him to name the price for Justin Jefferson, What does he ask for? Players, picks, etc.
Oh my gosh. What players on the Packers? Okay, so it would take quite a lot, obviously. The Packers, like, the thing about the Packers is that their roster is famously not as good as their quarterback, and they get carried by their quarterback. Like, that's kind of the whole deal. But were I to ask for players and picks, I think I would probably ask for a first round pick and Elton Jenkins, and because receiver is just like one of the most important positions on the field, right? And Elton Jenkins, and I don't know. Do they need Rashawn Gary? I feel like you could find a way to use him. Kenny Clark, but the Vikings are actually pretty good at defensive tackle right now, so that wouldn't really help that much. Jair Alexander. Yeah, how about that? Jair Alexander, Elton Jenkins, and a first round pick for Justin Jefferson. I feel like me saying that aloud, to me, in my brain, that seems like a pretty good. That seems like a win for the Vikings. I feel like it's one of those trades that you put it out on Twitter. Vikings fans hate it and Packers fans hate it. You know, it's like one of those, and it's like,
It'd be one of those like, oh, we may have struck gold here.
Yeah, right, exactly. Everybody hates it. Fantastic.
Yeah. Logan has one more question. He says, which 2 Halloween candies does James take from his kid, and which 2 does Reef steal from kids?
Logan knows me way too well. I mean, I wouldn't do that. Come on, man.
Yeah, well, probably not, unless you were wearing a Luke mask. I'm going to take the... See, the problem is that this happened on the same day that the Halloween candy...
I can't actually answer
popped.
this question. Yeah, I can't answer this question because it might reveal which one of my teams is on the Halloween candy draft.
Yeah, so in my particular case, I would go with the peanut or the peanut butter M&Ms if those were to appear in the small package, and I would probably end up getting the... I used to be big into Skittles, and I'm not big into Skittles anymore, so I don't know. It's like the weird... If it was if there's like a licorice thing came up, I might take that too. I try not to steal the gigantic peanut butter cups, but you know, if he's got 30 of them, he doesn't need 30 of them.
Yeah.
As the person who pays
notice.
for his dental bill, he doesn't need 30 of them. I will deal with what happens with me.
I will say this. I think the first round picks from that draft. Sorry, my phone just fell. The first round picks from that draft. Let me just take a look at 3 of the 4 first round picks from that draft. Absolutely end up on that list of candy that I'll steal. I'll just say that. Plus, actually, none of the second round picks. That's weird. One of the second round picks, but that's it. So of the top 4, it is 3 of the first round picks, 1 of the second round picks. And I will let you figure that out later when it's revealed who has what team.
All right, next up is Euleron, who asks, for James's old man corner, a corner we go to far too often, I twisted my hips too suddenly, and now it feels like I have a hot needle burying into my quad. Is my life over? Yes. You are... I forget which comic it was that was talking about how people used to live to like 800 in the Bible, and these were the days before medicine, so if they just fell, it was over. Yeah, that's what you're going to have to deal with. So my suggestion is to get your affairs in order. You can do most of that through your phone now, so that's positive for you. And just make sure you have a charger and someone willing to feed you and take care of you. But you are done. Sorry. Nolan Kaler asks, for the intersection of James's relationship corner and a Reef's chef station. Ooh, you have a chef station now.
Ooh, I like this. It's not even a corner, it's a whole station.
Yeah, I recently moved in with my girlfriend. What is the best meal I can prepare to prove, once again, that I'm a modestly capable housemate? Dairy and gluten are both off the table, so to speak.
Dairy and gluten. Okay. Dairy does make my initial suggestion slightly complicated, but not enormously complicated. So I like... so for a long time, I've been using this recipe that's adapted from a really old Alton Brown recipe called Chicken and 40 Cloves. And in it, I mean, in the episode, the Good Eats episode, he's like basically screwing around with a vampire. But in it, you cut up a whole chicken, you sear it in a cast iron pan, and then you throw in 40 cloves of garlic and some thyme, and you throw that into the oven until the chicken comes up to temperature. It's a meal that takes care of itself. What I like to do is then I like to pour a little bit of chicken broth in at the bottom near the end of the cooking. I think that creates a fun sauce at the end. What you can additionally do on top of that is turn that sauce into a gravy if you know how to make gravy, which because that pan is going to be full of oil and chicken stock, you're going to have to start the gravy in another pan. Just, a pat of butter and a tablespoon of flour, and kind of keep that on a medium heat until I like it. It'll turn blonde, and a lot of people will be like, "That's okay" when the flour smell is gone. I like it to turn closer to a peanut butter color, so long as you don't see any black specks. And that's your roux, and that'll be the thickening agent that you can put into the leftover sauce. That becomes a gravy. That gravy you'll put on top of mashed potatoes you make. There's a bunch of ways to make mashed potatoes without dairy, so keep that in mind and just make mashed potatoes the way that you want. But the way I've adapted it is instead of cutting up a whole chicken, oh my God, why would I do that? Why don't I just use the best cut of a chicken, the thigh? The thigh is so resistant to overcooking. It is the most delicious cut, I think, on a chicken besides the wing, but the wing is a little bit more complicated to cook. Or sorry, not the wing, the drumstick, a little bit more complicated to cook. And I just think that the balance of like unctuousness and flavor in a thigh is just fantastic. So I just take as many thighs as I think we're going to eat for 2 people. Sometimes it's only 2 thighs. It depends on the size that you're buying from the grocery store. And I just sear them on either side until I get a really good color, especially on the skin side. And then I put a thermometer into one of them. I wait for them to come up to temperature. I think officially the temperature for thighs is 175. That's the FDA recommendation. I would go a little bit lower, but and just do that same process with a little bit of chicken stock. Obviously, again, with the garlic, not 40 cloves, just adjust the number of cloves because it's going to be in the oven. A lot of garlic flavor will be leached out. But throw in a good chunk of cloves and some thyme and baste the chicken with the oil that's frying the garlic and the thyme before you put it into the oven. I'd recommend watching that episode of Good Eats or looking it up online, but just so you can get a guide on what everything is. But it is so easy; it cooks itself. You just have a thermometer, and they're telling you when the chicken is done, and it produces just a wonderful sauce.
So I had an idea, and then it got ruined when I reread the question and saw gluten was off the menu. So I had a good idea, but if you go out and get like a package of veggie, I believe it's like veggie ramen, but you can't use those noodles, but you can use the veggie pack, like the veggie chemical pack that comes with, and just get a small package of gluten-free. If you get like gluten-free ramen noodles, which apparently are a thing, I had no idea. You Suck at Cooking has this great video on different types of ramen you can make, and one of them is a spicy peanut broccoli one that I've had before, and it's delicious, and I hate ramen. And I feel like this would be a good idea for it. I have no idea if it would work with gluten-free ramen, but I think it's worth an opportunity. I think it's worth a chance. The channel is You Suck at Cooking. He's a fantastic follow. And it's the ramen one. I believe it's the second ramen that he does in this particular video. So it's the spicy peanut butter ramen. Spicy broccoli peanut butter one. So a lot of random stuff in it. Let's go to the next question, which is from Don from Ohio. The crisis actor himself asks, why is it a simpleton like Luke Braun can train small, furry, man-eating animals to pick Vikings games, inaccurately, while you guys in an entire Discord can't train a few killer bees to pick games? I thought all of you were, quote, bee experts. Sad. I want to point out the only real bee expert here is Dusty, who literally has bees in his backyard. Has bees.
And we never consulted when we get a bee question.
No, that would be wrong.
I would violate. Yeah, okay, it would violate the ethic of the podcast.
Yeah, it would violate the sanctity of the bee corner.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I mean, why would people ask me for my expertise if all I did was parrot Dusty's expertise?
Yeah, as
No,
opposed to
okay,
parroting other people online's expertise.
yeah,
That
but
would be weird.
yeah, that would be unusual. I draw upon community knowledge. That's different, of course, in ways that I will not define at the moment. Anyway, for the answer to your question, we don't train bees to do that because we train bees to help the earth. There is a bee shortage. We're worried about colony collapse disorder, Don, and we need to make sure that plants are pollinated. We cannot distract from that vital mission just to merely pick football games. Second, Luke Braun is not training small, furry, man-eating animals to pick Vikings games. They know it is important to him that he be correct, and they know that it would be humiliating for him if an animal outpicked him in a game. And so they learned on their own how to pick games so that they could spite him. Um, that's what's happening. There's no training. Luke didn't train them. They just knew what would make him look the worst, and it is to pick games better against the spread than gamblers.
I mean, this is science. Erroneous Monk asks, sounds like Russ did everything but cook on his flight to London. Question, what is your favorite airplane snack and why? What food items are absolutely off limits for you or your neighbors on a long flight? So, Russell Wilson spent according to reports, Russell Wilson spent 4 of his 8 hours on the flight to London doing knee bends and stretches in order to potentially come back for this game on Sunday. We're both of the belief that like that cannot stand. That is the worst. I can't.
Yeah, I would lose my if Russell Wilson wasn't actually built like a running back like he is, that's something that somebody would deck him for. I mean, it kind of makes me think like it's interesting that the person who took his job was also the only quarterback I can remember in recent NFL history to get punched in the jaw, because I feel like that's exactly what would have happened to Russell Wilson had he been the quarterback of the New York Jets at the time. Like, there's no way Ike Enemkpali lets him get away with that. That is ridiculous behavior. Go to sleep.
See, I'm trying to envision a scenario where that like works. Because I've been in situations where my back like really flares up, and I'm walking around, but I'm walking around in the back of the plane with the flight crew, who are all like, "Yeah, the seating on this plane sucks. Sorry." And like I hung out there for like 2 hours one time on a flight back from DC. So like I've done that, but I've never done like knee bends and stretches and like up and down the aisles. Like that just sounds terrible. Like, and as far as like food's concerned, I try to avoid food if at all possible, because I have no desire to spend any time in an airplane bathroom. I am a gigantic human being. My shoulders are way too broad.
Yeah, that's fair.
There's no reason for me to be inside of an airplane bathroom if I can not do it. It's like, no, it is the worst. I have been in an airplane bathroom once during ridiculous turbulence, and I was like, never again. I'm good. I will hold it till we land. Otherwise, peanuts and that little cookie Delta likes to give.
Man, I love that cookie, man. It's so good.
So much better than it has any right to be.
Yeah, what are you doing?
I don't know.
Why is it so good?
Just stop flying and just make the cookie for people.
Honestly, so much better for the world. No, for me, the off limit foods are obviously they're specific to people, because whatever causes people gas, that's bad. That's off limits. Know your body. Don't eat foods that give you gas. Alliums that are raw that'll affect anybody's breath. Get that out of here, man. So no garlic, no raw onion, that kind of thing. Like, obviously I like garlic. I'll eat garlic if there's garlic and mashed potatoes that they're serving me. I think that that's fine, but it cannot be garlicky, right, in the way that it'll affect somebody's breath. So I think it's that kind of stuff that affects the environment around you, less than stuff like, I mean, they probably are concerned about peanuts because of peanut allergies and stuff like that. Yeah, sure, that makes sense. Make sure nobody dies in a plane, etc. But for me, it's just like a know your body sort of thing. I don't really have much of a problem on planes in terms of eating something and then feeling like I need to go to the lav, because I can usually just fall asleep and then I'll hold it and I don't have to worry about it. But one thing I've noticed is that of all the things, planes I think have generally gotten worse over the past 20 years for fairly obvious reasons. Mostly like it's just no one's really paying for a great economy experience. So why would we provide that for you? We'll just cut this, we'll cut this, we'll cut this, and we'll charge you the same. Which, within the system that's constructed, I understand. But the one thing that seems to have gotten better is that these bathrooms, I think, are much more cleaner and efficient. And so at least that James would know because he's an ogre and he's not able to get into them.
I flat out refuse to go in if I absolutely can avoid it. It's it's much better for everyone involved. I don't want to die, or find myself. I don't want to get stuck trying to get into that stupid airplane bathroom that's like in between. Like the one in the back's going to be bigger, but like the one like kind of in between. Front and the back. No, that's no. Ryan asks, my fiance is out of the country. Need some ideas for Halloween night activities since assembling the Christmas tree is delayed. So what are other normal Halloween activities? Also, to be fair, her parents' tree is up, but it's not decorated. And no, that's not for Halloween. So Ryan is the one who every year not complains, because I feel like that's the wrong way, raises awareness about his fiance's family tradition of decorating the tree on Halloween. And now the poor man has nothing to do because his fiance is going to be out of town. So, do you do something normal, or do you do the power move and do it now while they're not there and just show them up when they get there?
So, I think the two options are to do something normal on Halloween, like go to a Halloween party, watch a Halloween movie if you're into that. Or the second move is, decorate the tree, but decorate it with only Halloween decorations.
See, I feel like that makes a mockery of their of what they do on a yearly basis. However, if you do the Christmas decorations now, I feel like that shows them how ridiculous what they're doing is. It's not a mockery. It's more of a, see, I told you so thing. And I feel like that's better.
Okay. I get it, but I just feel like it encourages the Christmas creep than it discourages it.
Well, yes, but it could potentially, maybe. What you could do is just go to a midnight showing of Rocky Horror Picture Show instead, and just call it good. Just avoid, just avoid that
just do
entirely.
That.
Just go see Rocky Horror, yell out at the screen, throw the popcorn, get the squirt gun out, have fun. Just do that instead. Sing along and ignore the fact that you have Christmas trees in your home on October 31st.
God Christ.
And finally, this week, Jesse from New York graces us with his presence and says, in honor of us playing famous live stream gamer and occasional quarterback Kyler Murray this week, rank these in-game power-ups as to how effective they would be in an actual game. So, we're going to choose the best two out of this. Number 1, extra timeout. Each half you receive 4 timeouts as opposed to the usual 3. Like the replacement ref one. Number 2, revive. All of your injured players are raised to healthy status at the beginning of the game. Number 3, golden goal. A kicker is perfect inside of 50 yards. Number 4, QB sneak peek. 5 opportunities throughout the game to see the opposing team's play call pre-snap.
Ooh.
I like that one. Number 5, no laundry. 1 quarter where no penalties can be called on your team.
Okay, so
that's NFL Blitz style.
We have to caveat this one with, but you don't get to change your style of play in response.
Right. It's not, you're not just going to start playing NFL Blitz out there and just kick around their wide receiver every play. Unless that's going to be how you play for the other 3 quarters. Meh. Let's go to number 6, the Barry Sanders effect. Running back always breaks the first tackle. Number 7, wide right. Every punt lands in the opponent's inside the opponent's 10-yard line.
The right here is spelled with a W, so.
Nice. Number 8, Hex the Moon. A curse on the other team causes a 25% increase in dropped passes. Number 9, Takeaway. Guaranteed 1 interception at some point in the game by your defense. Number 10, Challenge accepted. 1 challenge you choose will automatically go your way.
All right, so I like these a lot, but I think they are just a little bit unbalanced. I think, for example, the extra timeout is probably one of the weakest ones. I think that the even the modified version of the no penalty one is one of the stronger ones. But I think that the 2 most OP ones are Revive. Obviously, it depends on the state of your team. For the Vikings, this would have virtually no effect. But I think for most teams, this would have a phenomenal effect, right? Obviously, the 49ers, who for some reason believe in Trey Lance, would be able to get him, right? But also the Jets would be able to get Breece Hall. If we are excluding players that are on IR, I think that you would still end up in a really good spot. For example, the Cardinals will be able to play a healthy offensive line, right? Which is not something that... So for a lot of teams, Revive is just the best one. But the QB sneak peek one is wildly effective to me.
That is easily my favorite. Easily the best, easily the most effective one. After that, I think I'd go golden goal. I think kicker perfect inside of the 50.
I like that one too. I wonder if we would have to apply the same caveat as the no laundry one, but because then you would be able to do the thing where I talk about how if you finish every drive with 3 points, you're obviously you'd have to make it inside the 50, which is not necessarily easy, but you finish every drive with 3 points, you're one of the highest scoring offenses in league history, right? So there is something pretty cool about that, but man, the Hex the Moon one, right? Because that occurs over the course of the entire. It's a 25% increase in dropped passes, not the 25% of their passes are automatically dropped. I read that wrong. That would have been insane as well. QB sneak peek is up there. Revive works for most teams as the best one, and I feel like no laundry in the fourth quarter, like that one just feels like it could be something, but you still have to play well.
Yeah, but at the same time, it turns into the whole they're letting them play out there thing. Like, we got 1980s rules going on right now. We're gonna sell some VHSs with this. Kyler Murray's not gonna know what hit him. This quite literal situation. All right, well, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Arif, what do you have to plug?
You can go over to profootballnetwork.com/author/ahassan, and I've got a mailbag coming up for Friday morning. I've got quarterback power rankings, which I didn't plug on Twitter, but I don't want to because I had to actually rank them this time instead of tier them. That's mostly for search engines anyway. They'll find it. I've got a piece on the Giants and the Vikings and sustainability. And of course, I've got the week 7 recap from the beginning. So you can find all of those there at profootballnetwork.com/author/ahassan.
So that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Again, on November 17th, we'll be over at Union 32 Craft House, so check us out. That'll be sometime around 7:30 p.m. So check us out. Again, my name is James. For Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember that the Vikings are not to be trusted. And we'll be back next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of Pro Football Network, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed, at NorseCodeDN, or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
All things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.